Continuing our journey on The Rise the Limit, we move from the dark colonial legacy of Columbus's expeditions to Chapter 3, Cancelled Iguana Island, Caicos Coexistence. After discovering that the famous Rock Iguanas actually live on a different island than advertised, our traveler abandons the planned tourist excursion and instead turns attention to the reptiles literally underfoot at the resort. What follows is an unexpected education in how 3 native lizard species, curly-tailed lizards, dwarf geckos, and anoles, have carved out distinct niches to share the same Caribbean habitat. Cancelled Iguana Island, Caicos Coexistence. Your guide to the kingdom of the iguanas. After a dinner priced for a minor potentate, it became clear that my mission in the Turks and Caicos required a pivot. I needed an experience to justify the expense report, something that felt primal rather than transactional. Local consensus, delivered with the certainty of religious doctrine, pointed to a single pilgrimage, Iguana Cay. Known colloquially as Iguana Island, this guarded sanctuary promised a kingdom of prehistoric holdouts and appeared to be the most memorable activity available that did not involve a hedge fund. As a man who appreciates the herpetological arts, one who can distinguish a skink from a gecko at 50 paces, I accepted my destiny. Reaching this lost world required navigating 3 distinct paths, each a trial of character. The most popular option was the guided boat tour, a floating carnival of rum punch and forced bonhomie. It promised snorkeling and snacks, a buffet-style approach to adventure for those who prefer their nature pre-digested. For the purist, the ferry from Leeward Marina offered a direct 10-minute shot across the channel, a no-nonsense shuttle for the serious reptile observer. Then there was the path of the zealot, a rental kayak or stand-up paddleboard. This option involved a solitary, grueling paddle across the turquoise expanse, a self-powered flagellation to prove one's worthiness to the island's scaly sovereigns. The island itself operates as a carefully managed kingdom under the Turks and Caicos National Trust. To protect the burrows, bureaucrats have constructed boardwalks that channel human traffic, allowing visitors to observe the Turks and Caicos rock iguanas without disturbing their ancient rhythms. These creatures are not mere lizards. They are prehistoric condo presidents, masters of their domain who patrol the sand dunes with the unblinking stare of a board member about to veto a patio extension. A small conservation fee funds their continued reign, and the first commandment is clear: do not touch and do not feed the administration. They are accustomed to paparazzi, not participation. I was deep in logistical considerations, treating the route planning with the gravity of a military extraction. I strategized snack rations and ferry schedules, imagining myself a modern Darwin gliding ashore to chronicle the majestic indifference of these reptilian aristocrats. My field journal was prepared for notes of profound ecological significance. Then, at the 11th hour, a single piece of intelligence dismantled the entire operation. Iguana Cay was merely a satellite office. The true seat of power, the primary habitat and reptilian motherland, was on Ambergris Cay. The grand expedition to Iguana Cay was cancelled on the spot. The complex maritime options and social hurdles dissolved in the face of this superior data. Why undertake a specialized pilgrimage to see the regional managers when a short journey in another direction leads straight to global headquarters? The logic was as clean and brutal as a credit card statement. My quest for the authentic prehistoric experience would simply have to be rerouted. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. Charles Darwin. The confident little lizard on your patio. I had come for dragons, but I found myself staring at minions. With the grand expedition to Little Water Cay scuttled by the realization that better reptiles awaited elsewhere, I was left to ponder the lesser fauna of Grace Bay. My quest for reptilian gilter was answered not with a roar, but with a rustle. There, on the scorching flagstones, sat a creature so ubiquitous it was basically part of the architecture. There is very little chance you can visit these islands without meeting this particular local. It is a small, brazen lizard with a tail curled like a gentleman's quizzical eyebrow, the Turks and Caicos curly-tailed lizard, or Laocephalus samodromus to the taxonomically inclined. What makes it noteworthy, beyond its fearless loitering, is that it is endemic. This is its only home. The little beast darting away with a fallen corn chip is a unique piece of the nation's natural inheritance, a tiny, scaly patriot. Its most famous feature, that jaunty tail, is not a fashion statement. One might view it as a flourish of biological punctuation, but it acts as a flagpole of war and an expendable limb of last resort. The high, coiled posture is pure territorial machismo, a clear signal to other lizards that this particular patch of sun-drenched concrete is spoken for. Should a predator disagree, the tail detaches and performs a frantic, twitching solo. A macabre puppet show designed to distract the attacker long enough for the lizard's front half to vanish. It is a brilliant, if grisly, survival strategy. Unlike most of its skittish cousins worldwide who treat humans as bipedal harbingers of doom, this lizard is shockingly confident. Its boldness is a product of an island life with few natural enemies and a quick adaptation to the walking vending machines known as tourists. While primarily insectivores, providing a pro bono pest control service, they are also opportunists. They have learned that resorts are simply enormous open-air buffets. Their scientific name, Samodromus, translates from Greek as sand runner, a descriptor that fits their energetic sprints across the ground, a motion that seems fueled by equal parts solar power and cracker crumbs. Just when you think you have this little operator figured out, the complexity deepens. I was observing the Caicos Island subspecies. Over on Grand Turk, there is a separate branch of the family tree, a slightly different model of curly-tailed lizard. Even within this tiny nation, there is an absurd level of local variation, as if evolution decided to get needlessly specific. It is a creature that manages to be simultaneously a national treasure and the island's most successful panhandler, a living artifact that will happily eat a dropped pretzel. The tiny, sticky acrobats of the night. My son, having witnessed my brief tenure as the world's foremost authority on the TCI curly-tailed lizard, decided to up the ante. As we walked past the indifference of the hibiscus bushes and the treacherous territory of misplaced crocs, he made a proclamation. He had spotted a gecko. I prepared to dismiss this as the kind of tall tale a boy spins after too much sun and sugar, but a specific detail snagged my attention. He claimed the island was home to a gecko so small it could sit on a dime. This was no mere sighting, it was an economic statement. On an island where a simple dinner can vaporize a wallet, the existence of an animal that fits on a 10-cent piece felt like a fiscal miracle. My quest was clear, though the pursuit immediately revealed a fundamental divide in the local reptilian society. While the preening, swaggering, curly-tailed lizards commanded the sunlit hours, running the resort grounds with the confidence of scaly landowners, the gecko is the undisputed spymaster of the shadows. One does not simply find them by looking down, one finds them by looking up, where they defy physics on the ceiling with the unblinking judgment of a translucent god. The gecko encountered most often around the resort is the tropical house gecko, a creature that is less a native and more a highly successful expatriate. Pale and ghost-like, this consummate globetrotter arrived on these shores and simply decided to stay, colonizing the archipelago, and nearly every other tropical spot on Earth, with the efficiency of a franchise. We found them holding nightly vigils around our patio light, waiting for moths to commit unforced errors. They are technically invasive, but complaining about them feels like scolding a particularly effective butler for being too good at pest control. However, this pale invader is merely the public face of the gecko community. The island's true heir, the Caicos Dwarf Gecko, is a different beast entirely. It is a recluse, a hermit, and one of the smallest land animals with a backbone on the planet. Barely an inch long, it lives hidden in the leaf litter, so exquisitely camouflaged that locating one requires the observational skills of a satellite and the patience of a saint. This creates a fascinating social dynamic. The prominent chirping gecko on the wall is a foreigner, while the indigenous resident lives a life of profound obscurity, surviving by remaining overlooked by the very tourists who have taken over its home. Its survival relies on feet covered in microscopic hairs that exploit molecular forces, allowing it to cling to almost any surface. It seems their strategy isn't just about hiding, but about knowing exactly when to stick to the plan and the walls, the throat-flashing jewel of the trees. My son, having had his claim of a gecko sighting vindicated by the discovery of nocturnal wall-scaling acrobats, had also logged some sort of anole in his mental field journal. With the gecko investigation officially closed, this left one final item on the docket for our grand herpetological survey of the resort grounds. This next creature was far less mysterious. We saw them everywhere, slender, sleek lizards clinging to tree trunks, fence posts, and the sun-warmed walls of our building, looking like living punctuation marks on the scenery. They were the visible daytime counterparts to the secretive geckos, the public face of the island's reptilian populace. These were the Turks and Caicos anole, Anolis scriptus. The specific epithet, suggesting something written upon, refers to the delicate patterns mapped across their bodies, a subtle distinction likely appreciated only by those with a magnifying glass and a taxonomy degree. Viewing them from a few feet away, however, their most remarkable trait is not their pattern, but their ability to function as living mood rings. Unlike the camouflage of a soldier, the anole's color shift is a broadcast of emotional welfare. They transition from a dull, inconspicuous brown to a brilliant, electric green. A bright green anole is a creature living its best life, warm, content, and advertising its physiological superiority to the neighborhood. A brown one is generally cold, stressed, or perhaps just contemplating the existential weight of being small in a world of large birds. The performance does not stop at color. The male elevates the display from passive signaling to active semantic shouting through his dewlap. This throat fan, colored a startling yellow or orange, snaps open and shut with the speed of a telegraph operator keying a frantic message. It is a complex social signal, a flash of bright skin used to claim territory from rivals and peacock for potential mates. With a single silent motion, he announces that this particular branch is his stock portfolio is flourishing, and he is available for courtship. The specific hue of this fan distinguishes him from the pinkish-red equipment of his American relatives, a precise evolutionary color coding that prevents romantic misunderstandings across species lines. Watching this display, one has to wonder how such a frantic signaler survives in a veritable scrum of reptilian competition. The bold, curly-tailed lizards command the ground floor, and the geckos hold a monopoly on the night. The answer is a marvel of social engineering known as niche partitioning. It is a quiet agreement to divide the real estate, eliminating the need to squabble over jurisdiction. This specialization is the result of ages of refinement. The Turks and Caicos Atoll shares a common ancestor with the mainland's American green atoll, both descending from a biological blueprint that proved wildly successful. Evolution essentially took a winning formula and franchised it, tweaking the model slightly for each new market. This process happened with such specificity that the anoles on the Grace Bay bank differ slightly from their cousins over on Grand Turk. The result is a perfectly layered society operating under our noses. The curly-tailed lizards rule the patio stones and pathways with absolute authority. The geckos own the darkness, scaling the vertical world after sunset. And the anoles, in their manicured kingdom of broad-leafed plants and tree trunks, command the space in between, flashing their moods and their ambitions to the Caribbean sun. And that brings us to the close of Chapter 3, Cancelled Iguana Island, Caicos Coexistence. Sometimes the most meaningful discoveries happen when our original plans fall through. What began as a quest for famous rock iguanas became an intimate study of the reptilian neighbors sharing resort patios and trees, revealing how native species carve out their own spaces in a small island ecosystem. Next time, we'll explore how external forces shape daily life in the Turks and Caicos, from confusing traffic patterns to the complex story behind a simple conch dinner. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Conch and Consequence. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. When British driving laws meet American economics on a tiny island nation, the result is a daily dance with danger that perfectly captures the contradictions of colonial legacy. Chapter 4. For Whom the Conch Tolls explores the Turks and Caicos Islands, where steering wheel placement becomes a metaphor for identity caught between empires. Here, the endangered queen conch carries the weight of both cultural tradition and ecological crisis, while Jags McCartney's vision of local sovereignty wrestles with the realities of foreign influence and internal politics. For Whom the Conch Tolls. Conch, lizards, and Caribbean culinary conservation. Patrick Leigh Fermor noted that the Caribbean's charms were a little too blatant, too luscious, too explicit. He was right. Any lingering scientific ambition had dissolved in the resort pool, forcing a surrender to the day's only remaining obligation: lunch. We set out in pursuit of the queen conch, not in the wild, but on the plate. Our destination was a weathered wooden shack dedicated to the preparation of this particular sea creature. We ordered the island standards, the fritters, the salad, and the fried. The conch, pronounced conch, is a massive sea snail housed in a spiral shell with a flared lip and polished pink interior. For centuries, this shell functioned as both soup bowl and signaling trumpet. The meat itself is firm white muscle, a dense protein that demands effort to prepare. Cracked conch arrives tenderized and battered, a golden, crisp cutlet. The fritters are savory spheres of chopped meat and dough. The salad, however, remains the creature's purest presentation: raw flesh cured in lime juice with peppers and onions, a bright, acidic ceviche. To eat conch is to participate in the archipelago's oldest continuous habit. The native Taino relied on it long before European sails broke the horizon. For the freed slaves who later settled these cays, establishing the communities described in local emancipation law, the conch guaranteed independence. It was a protein pulled from the shallow seagrass by hand, requiring no currency and no permission. It was the dietary anchor of a life carved from the reef. But relying on the wild has limits. In the 20th century, the Turks and Caicos turned to export, and the queen conch shifted from a staple of survival to a global commodity, pushed steadily toward overfishing. This pressure sparked an idea so practical it was almost certainly doomed: the world's first commercial conch farm, established on Providenciales in 1984. It was a bold experiment in mariculture that attempted to raise gastropods from egg to market. For decades, the facility even employed ambassadors, Sally and Jerry, two conchs used to educate tourists on the process. Biology, however, does not respect quarterly earnings. You cannot rush a conch. It takes 4 years to mature, a slow calcification toward that iconic pink lip. Battered by hurricanes and crushing operating costs, the farm eventually closed, placing the full weight of our appetites back upon the wild population. The menu now carried the subtext of this scarcity. As I considered the ecological footprint of the blessed meal, a visitor arrived. One of the local curly-tailed lizards, the species I had observed on the patio earlier, approached our table. He moved not with diplomatic swagger, but with the focused, jerky rhythm of a scavenger. "Maybe he should have some of what we're having," I joked. My son tossed a scrap of cheese onto the deck. The lizard abandoned all caution, scurrying forward to devour the offering. He saw an opening and took it with a frankness I had to admire. The conch had failed to adapt to the farm, but here, at least, was a creature that knew exactly how to work the system. The contradiction on the Queen's Highway. Witnessing my son establish his own tiny dominion by feeding cheese to a local lizard, I felt it was time to survey our own provincial surroundings. We embarked on a supply mission, a heroic trek to that most sacred of modern outposts, the local supermarket. Inside, we found a perfect replica of any grocery store in suburban Ohio. The aisles were laid out with a familiar logic. The brands were the same. The lighting had that same vaguely unforgiving hum. It was a flawless piece of American suburbia dropped onto a Caribbean island. This feeling of displacement was merely an appetizer for the main course of vehicular anarchy we found on the roads. Here, in the Turks and Caicos, is an automotive system so baffling it feels like a national dare. It is a place where the ghost of the British Empire and the inescapable reality of American manufacturing have gotten into a head-on collision, and everyone has agreed to just keep driving through the wreckage. They drive on the left, a firm nod to their status as a British overseas territory. But the cars themselves are almost entirely from the United States, meaning the steering wheel is also on the left. This creates the magnificent spectacle of a person piloting a 7-passenger SUV from what is effectively the passenger seat. This arrangement turns every right-hand turn into an act of faith and makes overtaking another vehicle a maneuver requiring either a brave co-pilot or a well-developed psychic sense. It's like watching a ship's captain trying to navigate a narrow channel while lashed to a chair in the ship's galley, peering out a porthole. You see a Ford F-150 rumble past, its driver craning his neck like a curious flamingo, and you have to wonder about the thought process. The answer, it turns out, is a masterclass in pragmatism. As a British territory, the islands should by rights be filled with proper right-hand drive cars from the UK or Japan. But the United States is right there. A colossal and convenient emporium of affordable vehicles and parts. Forcing residents to source their cars from halfway around the world would be economically punitive. So the government, in a grand collective shrug, allows the chaos to continue. It is a system born not of design but of concession, a daily, rolling monument to what happens when stiff upper lip tradition meets the gravitational pull of a good deal. Common sense is not so common. Voltaire in his Dictionnaire philosophique of 1764. A nation defending its shores from chaos. Surviving the roundabout felt like a significant victory, yet my assessment of risk was parochial. I had assumed the island's peak danger was the daily demolition derby on the Leeward Highway, where tourists navigate Suburbans from the passenger seat. I was wrong. My inquiries, initially aimed at lizards, drifted toward darker island realities. The true peril arrives from the sea, delivered on what locals grimly refer to as misery subscriptions, dangerously overcrowded wooden sloops from Haiti. The geography is simple and brutal. Less than 150 miles of open water separates the manicured resorts of the Turks and Caicos from the deepening collapse of its much larger neighbor. For years, the crossing was viewed primarily as a humanitarian crisis, a steady, tragic trickle of families seeking refuge. But as government authority in Haiti drastically receded, the narrative shifted. The situation evolved from a tragedy into a national security thriller. The powerful gangs seizing control across the water are no longer just local operators. They function as sophisticated international enterprises. The conversation on the island has darkened in kind. It is no longer just about economic migrants, but about the syndicates that traffic them alongside narcotics and, most critically, firearms. Residents explained that a recent spike in violent crime, including homicides on this otherwise peaceful archipelago, was not random. Authorities trace the bloodshed directly to these networks establishing a foothold, armed with weapons that arrived on those same desperate boats. The challenge has moved beyond border enforcement to an invisible invasion. Faced with a narco-state setting up shop on its doorstep, the government deployed the most powerful weapon known to bureaucracy, a threefold strategy. First comes the high-tech moat. The Royal Police's Marine branch, equipped with coastal radar and patrol boats, attempts to intercept vessels before they make landfall. Second is the internal purge. Special police units target suspected gang affiliates already within the territory, focusing on seizing the illegal guns that act as the currency of their trade. Finally, a public relations campaign frames the operation not as policing, but as a defense of national sovereignty, a tidy, bullet-pointed solution for a messy reality. Sitting in the resort, processing this geopolitical briefing, the scale of the task seemed impossible. Guarding 150 miles of ocean against small wooden ghosts is a Herculean labor, a lonely battle to protect a fragile tranquility from a tidal wave of instability. The peace here is not a natural state of being. It is a product, actively defended and perpetually at risk. The turquoise water and gentle surf hide a frontier. The island's most precious and political dirt. With the sobering geography of the Haitian Strait behind us, my attention drifted from the horizon back to the roadside. As we drove, I began to notice a different category of solicitation stapled to the telephone poles. Sun-bleached signs offered tantalizing deals on acreage. Some appeared to be official government notices. Others had the distinct aesthetic of a scheme devised by a man whose office address is the third picnic table from the pier. These flyers raised a query that felt immediately urgent. Who, precisely, owns this place? On an island where a single acre can command a fortune, property rights are the bedrock of the social architecture. My prior scientific interest in reptile habits would have to wait. I was now on an intellectual safari into the wild topography of property law. The confusion begins with two words: Crown land. This is no quaint designation for a public park. It encompasses all land in the country not held by a private deed. Technically, these limestone scorched earth holdings belong to the British monarch. One assumes the king loses little sleep over these scrubby acres, occupied as he is with more domestic pageantry. In practice, the power to administer this land lies with the local government. This arrangement is not merely bureaucratic, it is historical. After the indigenous populations were removed and the salt industry rose and fell, newly freed slaves built their lives on this ground. They settled where they could, often without paper titles, establishing a tradition of occupancy that predated modern zoning. That history informs the modern Crown land policy, a system intended to keep native-born citizens, belongers, from being displaced by foreign capital. In a market where a vacant lot matches the endowment of a small university, this program acts as a leveler. It allows a belonger to lease a residential plot for a price that would barely cover a parking space in Miami. The discount, however, is a conditional gift. The recipient must build a home on the land, typically within 2 years. It is a demanding piece of social engineering. The policy operates like a challenging inheritance. It is a cherished birthright, but the logistical hurdles of construction often ignite bitter, decades-long family disputes. Furthermore, handing out valuable resources for pennies creates a political friction that rivals any Shakespearean drama. Governments here have long faced scrutiny over who receives the choicest slices of the national cake. For those who benefit, it is a source of profound security. For everyone else, it is a flashpoint of debate. It is a starter kit for homeowners and a political football rolled into one dusty parcel of earth. That afternoon, back on the resort patio, the universal nature of this struggle became clear. I watched a native anole lizard perched on a branch, puffing out his bright orange throat fan to declare dominion over a single hibiscus bush. On this island, everyone is fighting for their piece of the rock. The only difference is the scale. The unseen hand on the property ladder. The lizard's reptilian defense of his hibiscus bush had clarified the stakes, but the human mechanism for territory management proved far more convoluted. As I watched the tide erase my footprints from the sand, a less romantic question bubbled up, the kind economists ask to ruin a perfectly good vacation. If the Crown Land system is a benevolent tool for keeping locals from being priced out of paradise, why doesn't every island nation adopt it? My investigation, conducted from the command center of a poolside lounger, suggested the answer lay in the fine print. The first major casualty of the system is efficiency. In a ruthless free market, land acts like a contestant on a survival show. The plot best suited for a resort usually becomes a resort. The patch perfect for farming becomes a farm. Price is the judge that sends every parcel to its most profitable use. Under the Crown Land model, however, a government committee becomes the arbiter of allotments. Decisions may hinge on social policy or political networks rather than viability. It is akin to letting a toddler pick a stock portfolio. The intentions are pure, but one risks ending up heavily invested in graham crackers. The second consequence hits closer to home for the average resident. Owning a piece of land outright, holding a freehold title, is a foundational pillar of a modern economy. It is a golden ticket that allows a person to walk into a bank and secure a loan to start a business or build a house. A government lease, by contrast, is a library card. You have the right to use the book, but the bank knows you do not own it. Asking for a loan against a lease solicits the same look from a loan officer as trying to pay for groceries with a firm handshake. The policy grants access to the land, yet it chokes off the ability of citizens to tap into their primary asset to build generational wealth. Finally, concentrating the power to dispense real estate in the hands of the state invites a problem as old as governance itself. When a handful of officials can grant access to beachfront property for pennies on the dollar, temptation does not just knock, it kicks the door in. The history of the Turks and Caicos is peppered with scandals proving the difficulty of keeping this process clean. A transparent market, for all its sins, diffuses that power, making it much harder for one administrator's cousin to suddenly acquire all the best lots. The result is a complex paradox. While the goal is to shield the local population from foreign capital, the system risks trapping them in a static economy. It leaves the observer and the islanders caught between the safety of protection and the risks of opportunity. Islands' ideals, journeys' grace. If the Crown land system appeared prone to the friction of petty influence, it naturally begged the question of whether any leader had managed to steer the islands without running aground. The answer was yes, and his name was grand enough to be embossed in gold on the hull of a battleship, James Alexander George Smith Macartney. Locals called him Jags, a necessary shorthand given a full name longer than some of the territory's statutes. He belonged to a new class of Caribbean leader, educated and armed with a vision that transcended the mere management of post-colonial decline. In 1976, at the absurdity young age of 31, he became the country's first chief minister. While his contemporaries elsewhere were likely struggling to organize a filing cabinet, Macartney was busy founding the People's Democratic Movement and laying the architectural drawings for a modern nation. His strategy for the islands was pragmatic and controversial. He championed the arrival of the Club Med Turquoise Resort, a move that critics might have dismissed as clearing the brush for foreign hotel chains. But for Macartney, this was calculated geometry. With British financial aid dripping out slow and thin, he saw tourism not as an invasion, but as the only viable engine for independence. His goal was to ensure the belonger population secured a seat at the table rather than waiting for crumbs under it. He was dynamic, popular, and made the impossible scale of nation-building feel briefly manageable. Then came the tragedy, delivered with the blunt finality of a telegram. In 1980, Macartney took a private plane to the United States. He died when it crashed in New Jersey. He was only 34. The loss of a founding father is always a shock, but for a country as young as the Turks and Caicos, it was a cataclysm. In the vacuum he left, the usual chorus of political paranoia swelled. Rumors swirled that he was removed by the white establishment for being too powerful, or that he was entangled in the very trade he sought to regulate. These theories still circle his legacy like pilot fish on a shark, a dark counterpoint to the official history. Today, his name marks the airport on Grand Turk and a national holiday, permanent monuments to what might have been. With the weight of this compressed history settling on our shoulders, we did what any culturally sensitive visitor would do. We went to get pizza by the ocean. The sunset performed its nightly routine, a display so stubbornly beautiful it felt almost rehearsed. Back in our room, the island's wildlife made a final, unscripted cameo. A small lizard, a younger cousin of the diplomat we had fed earlier, skittered across the floor, inspecting the tile for dropped crusts. It was a brief distraction before reality knocked, literally, in the form of a maintenance worker arriving for necessary repairs. We were politely ejected onto the patio while the work was done, left to watch the last of the light fade from the sky. This marked the end of our time on the main thoroughfares. Tomorrow, we would trade the complicated ghosts of national history for the simple transactional pleasures of isolation. We were boarding a plane for a private island, leaving the anarchy of the roads and the questions of governance behind. Grace Bay Club, Luxury Service Woes and FHR Value. Grace Bay Club stakes its claim on the beach's prime acreage by occupying enough square footage to house a small colony of exiles. In an era where developers typically stack hotel rooms like panic-induced Tetris blocks, these suites operate as seaside apartments, boasting terraces broad enough to host a minor legislative assembly. The property attempts to offer a culinary reprieve from the island's logistical friction. The Infinity restaurant and raw bar anchors the scene with seafood that has escaped the sad grey depression common to hotel dining. Nearby lies the Infinity Bar, a 90-foot polished slab of social architecture that holds the title of the Caribbean's longest bar. Recently refreshed with a shimmering white and gold surface, it is designed to enhance the sunset, provided one can ignore the irony of sitting at a bar named Infinity while contemplating the finite nature of a vacation. Yet within this fortress of solitude, the experience was hindered by a human element acting as a friction brake on the machinery of luxury. The energy of the staff did not match the polish of the setting. Service lagged, suffering from visible turnover and a morale deficit that manifested in slow responses and missed cues. Employees often appeared to be working through a haze of fatigue, a stark reminder of the island's broader economic tension. The glossy veneer of tourism sits awkwardly here, supported by a labor force that seems understandably weary of the relentless demand to be cheerful for strangers. For travelers looking to salvage value from this discrepancy, I discovered that treating the booking like a tactical military operation yields results. Engaging an American Express fine hotels plus resorts booking functions like a diplomatic immunity card against mediocrity. The perks, daily breakfast, a property credit and upgrades soften the edges of the service shortcomings. Crucially, the guaranteed 4 o'clock late checkout acts as the ultimate buffer. It allows guests to maximize their time on the sand, offsetting the slow service with the gift of hours. The combination of the generous suite size and these financial levers ensures the trip maintains a fair price-to-value ratio, even if you occasionally have to mix your own drink. We utilized every minute of that late reprieve, watching the sun climb high above the water. Eventually, however, the clock ran out. We gathered our belongings, surrendering the terrace to its original lizard inhabitants. It was time to trade the main island's cocktail of luxury and logistical chaos for something more secluded. We headed for the airstrip to board a plane for a private island, leaving the 90-foot bar behind for a place where the ratio of iguanas to humans skewed comfortably in favor of the reptiles. From supermarket aisles to conch shells, Chapter 4 revealed how even the smallest details tell bigger stories about identity, power, and survival in these remarkable islands. The collision of British rules with American economics, the weight of conservation against tradition, and the quiet moments watching lizards dart across restaurant tables all weave together the complex reality of modern Turks and Caicos. Next time, we're taking flight to one of the most exclusive pieces of real estate in the Caribbean, where isolation becomes luxury and scarcity transforms into desire. Get ready for Ambergris Cay, where the journey from whale byproduct to billionaire playground will challenge everything you thought you knew about value itself. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Conch and Consequence. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. Until next time, this is The Rise the Limit.